And welcome to Nurses and Hypochondriacs, Dr. Rand Anbar.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, like I said before we started recording, I'm so excited to have you on. It's like I found your book by accident, like I said, because I was studying consciousness. I was watching a YouTube video on consciousness. They mentioned a book. I went to Amazon, and that's what I usually do. Whenever someone mentions a book, I go and look for it. And then for some reason, your book popped up, and I was like, what? Someone's doing child hypnosis? No way. And so I was like, I got to talk to this guy. And like I said, about a year ago, I was talking to my medical director here at the pediatric practice that I do work at sometimes in Palm Springs, California. And I was asking, I was like, hey, I would love to do hypnosis. He's like, hey, that sounds like a great idea. Let's keep the conversation going. And yeah, and it kind of fell through. I got busy, he got busy, and but now it's great to bring up this conversation in such a good time too. So tell us about yourself, Dr. Anbar. How did you get into doing hypnosis from being a pulmonologist, a pediatric pulmonologist, right?
I'll answer your question, but I have a question for you first. Okay. Do you really think it was an accident you found my book, or do you think you were guided to it?
My subconscious mind guided me to you.
There you go.
We were meant to meet.
So yeah, I'm a pediatric pulmonologist, and I was trained at the University of Chicago School of Medicine. I did my residency and fellowship at Harvard Medical School, so I have a pretty good pedigree. And I was practicing pediatric pulmonology back in 1997, so that's 25 years ago now, when a patient was referred to me. His name was Paul, and he was very allergic to milk products. Twice he almost died from eating a milk product, including a week before I met him when he required an intubation. They had to put a breathing tube into him to help him breathe, and his lung collapsed as a result. And they had to put a tube in his chest to help the lung re-expand. And 3 days later, when the lung seemed healed, they took the tube out, but the lung collapsed again, and he was sent to see me because I was a pulmonologist. And I met him. I was immediately connected with him. I later started recognizing that connecting with your patients is a key part of good healthcare. And I told him, we'll take the chest tube out, and if it collapses again, we'll have to do surgery to prevent the lung from collapsing yet again. He didn't like that. We took the chest tube out. He was fine. We sent him home. A week later, his mother calls me. She says, he has terrible pain at the chest tube site, and he can't walk. Oh, and wow. I'm afraid, she said, that he might have had brain damage as a result of the resuscitation a week ago, because that's what happened. He was 7 years old. He needed 6 months of rehabilitation after the first time he almost died. I said, is he having trouble breathing? Thinking maybe his lung collapsed again. Nope, no trouble breathing. Well, why are you calling me? I don't know who else to call. I said, well, I don't know much about pain. I know even less about people who can't walk, but I can certainly arrange to admit you to the hospital. So the next day, I admitted him to the neurologist service. I came by to make social rounds to say hello. I came into his room. He was sitting at his bedside. He was literally shaking, and he looked very upset. And I said, Paul, you look very upset. He said, yes, I am. It's always important to acknowledge how your patient feels. What's the matter? I don't know what's wrong with me. I've had a brain scan. I've had a nerve conduction study where they put electrodes in your muscles and run electricity through them. I'm sick and tired of being sick. I want to go home. So I sat in front of him. I took hold of his hands and I said, calm down. You'll get better. You'll be able to walk again soon. And I noticed as I was talking to him, he calmed down. And then I said, how would you like to walk now? And he said, yes. So I supported him. He stood up, walked up and down the hall with me, walked back to his bedside. I turned to the nurse practitioner I was working with and said, what just happened here? Was this faith healing? I laid on hands and he healed. She didn't know. I didn't know. The neurologist just should have known, didn't know. And I remember thinking to myself, if I could figure out what happened here in bottle, it'd be worth something.
You're right.
I didn't know what it was, and I filed it away as a curiosity. A year later, the same patient is now seeing me in pulmonary clinic because he has asthma. And he says to me, lately, when I've been smelling cheeseburgers, I've been developing asthma attacks. I thought it was a rather strange sounding symptom, but he's very allergic to milk products. Maybe milk molecules wafting through there, triggering his allergies. which, by the way, can't happen. I learned later. So I said, do you think this could be anything like last year when you couldn't walk? No, this is my asthma. I know my asthma. I said, okay, but do me a favor. Imagine eating a cheeseburger, which is something you could never do in real life. So he closed his eyes and starts imagining, and within seconds, he's having trouble breathing. His nose is opening up as he's breathing. He looks like he's in real bad trouble breathing. I'm thinking, oh no, he's gonna stop breathing. He's gonna have, and I said, stop it. So he did. I said, you're kidding me. No, I couldn't breathe. That was my asthma. I said, whoa, you thought you were into that? Now, I knew very little about hypnosis. I had a colleague who had studied it for 100 hours, but was too afraid to use it. She told me a little bit about it. So I thought, maybe there's something hypnotic going on here. So I said, put out your hand and imagine a glass plate covering it. Now, tell me if you feel me touching it. I touched his palm. Nope, can't feel that.
Wow.
Took out my pocket knife. That's the one the airlines confiscate later. Opened up the corkscrew and jabbed his hand. Nope, can't feel that. Whoa, this must be hypnosis. I don't know if it's you or me, but it's worth finding out about. And immediately I'm thinking, if you can think your way into illness, can you think your way out?
Brilliant.
So I wanted to send him to a psychologist who would teach him hypnosis. And then I said, Paul, go to the psychologist and come back and teach me because I'm interested. In college, I was a double major in psychology and biology. So I've also always liked psychology. And Paul says, I'm not crazy. I don't want to go see a psychologist. I want to work with you. I said, that's very nice, Paul, but I don't know anything about it. I don't care, teenager. Right. So I went to my friend, Dr. David Keith, who was a psychiatrist at upstate New York, where I was practicing. And he had supervised me while I was doing some counseling with patients with cystic fibrosis, another lung disease. And so he knew I knew what I was doing. And he said, you could do this. I'll back you up. If you have any issues, let me know. So with that backup, I started reading about hypnosis and I started practicing with Paul. And that's when I learned how to use hypnosis. He was my first teacher. For the first year, he and I worked together like every couple of weeks.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love how you outline the book too. It's very much like the hero's journey. Are you familiar with the hero's journey, the writing style, Joseph Campbell?
No, I know of it, but I'm not very familiar, no.
Your book is written just like that. And it's written how epic, heroic hero's journey movies are written, like Star Wars, Forrest Gump, how you are the hero and all of a sudden these mentors start coming into your life and teaching you things. And every time you get a new one, you tend to level up,
I think that's a really interesting concept. I do learn from each one of my patients. This is true. I also have come to the realization that I'm guided. And in my book, I talk about the very first patient with cystic fibrosis whom I met when I was 16 and he was 12 years old when I was volunteering at the Children's Hospital of Stanford. And because we became friends and we stayed friends for 7 years until he passed away, unfortunately, at the age of 19, which is what CF used to do in the 80s. Because of that, I went into medicine and into pediatric pulmonology. And then 25 years ago, I went with Paul. Because of our interactions, I learned about hypnosis and I went into this whole new phase of my career. I'm now practicing in La Jolla, California. And for the last 8 years, that's what I do full-time, pediatric hypnosis and counseling. So I've shifted away from doing both pulmonary and hypnosis. So yeah, so I think we meet guides in our life. Maybe it's like the mentors you talk about. And then we meet lots of small guides, of course. Every patient teaches me things.
Right. And I could totally relate to that. I mean, my whole life is like that. I have been studying video game theory, which is we're living in a simulated reality. And I'm reading a book by, I forget his last name, but it's called Simulation Theory. Right. And he was a video game creator. And it's like we're in a video game sometimes because we have these non-player characters that will give us information on stuff. And it, like I said, it kind of helps us level up or kind of helps us do something, win a prize, or something to where we need to be, you know? I mean, when you talk about guided, are you feeling that it's your patients that are guiding you, or it's your subconscious, it's your higher self, your higher power, God? Who do you think is guiding you?
So I believe I'm guided by the universe, God, whatever term you want it, by a force outside of our life. You're talking about simulation theory. My concept that I've developed from working with my patients, and my patients have told me these stories. It's not from my faith background. I'm Jewish, and they don't talk much about in the afterlife or the spirit
That's
world.
right.
And
Yeah.
Christianity doesn't. Yeah, Christianity talks about, going to heaven if you don't sin, stuff like that. But my philosophy is more similar to, I guess, Hinduism or Jewish mysticism, because Jewish mystics talk a little bit like I do. So my concept is that, so we're here in this world, we have our conscious selves, and then we have our subconscious selves, which overlaps with the soul. The soul talks to us through the subconscious. I'm not quite sure if it's different from the subconscious. It may not be. And then the subconscious can have access to information beyond this world.
Yes. Yes.
And so there, you can talk about spirits or demons or angels or God. And I've also come to learn that, or come to understand that, we have a limited brain. And when we're exposed to things beyond this world, we see them the way our brains can interpret it. So I don't think we see things or sense things the way they are. In fact, even things in the real world, quote unquote, we don't see as they are. So for example, when you perceive a color, the color is not in the real world. The color is the way your brain interprets a light wave coming at a certain frequency. So red has a longer frequency than blue, but there is no red or blue out there. The red and blue is just in our brain. Another example is if you put on glasses with mirrors in them that would turn the world upside down, and you just kept wearing them, after a couple of days, the world would turn right side up again, because the brain would compensate for it. So again, we don't see the real world the way it is. We see the real world in the way that our brain is programmed to help us cope and navigate as best we can through this world. And when you go to the unquote unquote other world, or whatever else is out there,
The
again,
other side,
what we perceive is what our brain can perceive. And I don't believe it's what's there. So people say, like, you've heard of near-death experiences.
yes.
And the scoffers will say, well, it can't be real because some people see Jesus, some people see Moses, some people see that. And what I think happens is people perceive something beyond themselves, and then the brain interprets it as something that they used to know. So if you're Jewish, you'll see Moses, sure. If you're Christian, you'll see Jesus, but it's none of those. It's something else that we interpret in that way. That's at least my current understanding.
Right. My understanding to that is it's based on the person's programming. Like, we all have a different computer database in a way of where we grew up, what religion we were, what our parents fed us from the time of 0 to 7, correct? So our subconscious mind is downloading all that, kind of like software in a way, right? And into our hard drive. So everybody, like, my perception, if I were to go and have a near-death experience, God forbid, I would probably have a much different experience than you would, although there would be certain similarities. Have you ever watched that movie Contact with Jodie Fisher? I know it's quite an old movie, but she goes to space, and it's almost like she's having a near-death experience, right? And that's where she sees her father, who is kind of like her higher self. I don't know, this movie just popped into my head. I guess I need to speak to it. And she had a vision of what heaven or space would look like, and it looked like a beach.
Correct. I was actually reaching behind me because I have the book Contact on my shelf. So I did
Stop
better
it.
than
I love it when this happens.
It's one of my favorite books.
Stop it. Oh my God, I love it when this happens. It's great.
Not a coincidence.
There are no coincidences.
When you have coincidences like this, you wonder So if this is
Synchronicities.
planned, if this is planned, then it had to be planned many years ago, because I've been carrying the contact book for 30 years, right? And you just bring it up today. Or, physics says that time doesn't exist.
Correct.
Everything is happening at once, if you would. And so these coincidences happens with just the confluence of events brought the two of us together to talk about it today.
Correct. Yeah, it's either that or we met somewhere in the future and we're like, hey, we got to go back in the past and do this because there's so much craziness going on. I mean, what do you think? We'll get into how you came into writing your book, and I'd like to talk more about the subconscious mind, but I kind of want to touch up on just how many mental health issues we're having, especially with our teenage patients these days. Now, I've been in practice since about 2005 in pediatrics, where as a pediatric nurse practitioner, where I've seen patients on my own, and I've never seen so many mental health issues. Sure, we're blaming it on COVID. Sure, we're blaming it on not enough vitamin D. Okay, sure, we're blaming it on our iPhones. Sure, I blame it a lot on kids can't be kids anymore, because they have a lot of helicopter parents. Parents are having a tight grip. Kids can't explore their identity anymore. Like, I love Eric Erickson, huge follower of his, because I had an Eric Erickson experience when I was in high school. I shaved my head, changed my name, but I didn't make myself non-binary. I was like, I'm just exploring myself. I took photography classes, made myself get into AP English, took acting classes, was in swim team, was a thespian. I did all these amazing things that I'm putting together now in adulthood. And I really don't think kids can do that anymore, because now they're like, oh, I'm non-binary, this is who I am. How do you know that? You have from 11 to about 18 to figure it out. Why do you have to figure it out now? So can you talk about just some of these issues going on with anxiety, and how I sent you that New York Times article on how people are just giving these kids pills, SSRIs, and I just think it's like, wow. So you see a child for 5 minutes and now you're going to go ahead and give them an SSRI and okay, bye. And that's it.
All right. So you ask a very big question. So first of all, you listed, I agree with I agree with everything you said about potential stressors for kids these days. I think that the biggest reason for the increased mental health problems is indeed related to the social media, and it's related in a couple of big ways. One is lack of sleep. Teenagers need 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night, and only about a fifth of teenagers are getting that today. A third sleep less than 7 hours a night. And why are they sleeping less? Because they're on their phones, on their social media. And we know very well that lack of sleep is associated with increased anxiety, depression, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And that's just the mental health stuff. Wait till we get to the physical stuff later on in life. We unleashed an experiment on the human population by unleashing iPhones and social media. It's an uncontrolled population. We are just doing it. And 30 years from now, we will know how bad we have injured ourselves. In China, they've outlawed use of social media for kids more than an hour a week. China knows it's bad. In fact, they've released TikTok to the rest of the world. And a TikTok article where girls are influenced to have all sorts of weird Tourette's, all sorts of weird things. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But China knows it's bad, so they don't let their citizens see it. But we in the Western world, if you want to be a conspiracy person, you might say it's done on purpose to influence us badly. So I think between the lack of sleep and between exposure to a lot of negativity on social media, and also the echo chamber of social media. In social media, you're shown over and over again things that you're interested in, quote unquote.
Yes.
The kid who's thinking, am I non-binary, is going to see so much non-binary stuff on the social media, it's going to become their truth. And kids are very influenceable, as you know. They're trying to figure who they are. When you're 7 or 8, everything is fine. Mom and dad tell you everything, but then you start being aware there's more to the world, and you try to learn. And the world is very overwhelming. Kids are not protected from the world anymore because of media. Pornography, horrible.
Oh, pornography is the worst. Yeah.
And it affects, not only makes kids guilty, but the virginity rate has increased among boys. Did you know that? Because of pornography. They don't go out with girls anymore. They just stay at home and use pornography. And when they get into their 20s, they don't know how to deal with girls because they haven't had any experience.
Exactly.
Autism. I'm sure autism is increasing because 2 and 3-year-olds are on their tablets rather than interacting in a playground, throwing sand at each other and getting mad and learning how to calm themselves. They don't have that experience.
That's I want to comment on that because you are very right on. So I took a break from practice. So I used to work at Children's Hospital from 2007 to about 2013. I took a little bit of a break. I was teaching and then I worked for the pharmaceutical industry. Okay. So in that break, I went back into practice in 2017. And when I came back, I started seeing very strange things, like 2-year-olds who wouldn't speak. And when I was practicing here in Palm Springs, my nurse has been here forever, like over 20 years. And he was like, oh, it's just because they speak Spanish. And I go, no, look at this kid, something's wrong. They were having affective dysphagia where they could, it was weird. They were like, like they could move their face, but they could not move their mouth. So their expressions were very strange. But then we used to have these iPads in our exam rooms, and I would watch the kid and they could run an iPad like a computer engineer. And I was like, something's not right. And I would go, what's going on? Well, they were addicted to the phones. So I started doing research. And just that day, wouldn't you believe it? A research study, the American Academy of Pediatrics had released a research study that this woman in Canada barely was on the cusp of, saying that iPhones are creating brain damage to these kids and making them developmentally delayed in speech and giving them this expressive aphasia was it aphasia? I think so. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And so I photocopied a ton of these media reports and I was giving them out to my patients. And I told them, I go, no iPhones, no media for 6 weeks on these kids, because they use them like pacifiers,
right?
And at that time I would go to restaurants and people are like, it's a family and the baby's like this with the iPhone, like literally, like I was like, what is going on? What happened to social interaction? And I would get a medical assistant, because I started working at other clinics, and medical assistants are like, hey, you seem a little different from everybody else. Can I ask you this question about my child? Because my child's not speaking, but everybody says that's okay. I go, it's not okay. So, and I'll tell you right what it is. And it was the same symptoms, and I still see, oh my God, speech therapy, you could barely get an appointment anymore because it's oversaturated. It's ridiculous.
Right, but it's not just speech development, it's social development.
Yes.
And we're going to be seeing the product of this in 20 or 30 years when you have 30 and 40 and 50-year-old adults who can't function, because as you know, the developmental milestones you hit in early childhood affect you your entire life. We're just starting to see the bad effects. It's going to get worse. That's the scary part. I want to talk about another question you asked earlier, which is the wish to give a medication after 5 minutes. This is not just true to mental health. This is true of all healthcare. I'm a physician. I am not proud. I'm not proud of the presidents we've had in this country, and I'm not proud of the healthcare we have in this country either.
Right.
Of course, I'm not proud of the education system or the legal system either. So, I can't dump on just one thing. But in healthcare, in part because of the way the system is structured, you're reimbursed for seeing lots of patients and just giving them a pill, be it in medical or mental health. And the problem with giving a pill is if you're giving the pill for the wrong reason, or giving the pill for an incomplete reason, you get patients who don't respond at all or don't respond well. And then they come back and you give them another pill because you're going to have a stronger pill or whatever, mental health or physical health. I can tell you story after story, as I'm sure you can as well, of people who have been really mishandled by the healthcare system because they just want to give pills. I'll tell you a quick story. This is from my book. This 12-year-old girl came to see me because she was anxious. But she was anxious because every night a ghost came to her and told her to kill herself.
Oh my God.
And she had tried to commit suicide twice, and she'd been in a hospital a couple of times, and she was given zombie medicine. I call that antipsychotics. So she was kind of snowed when I met her. And so what did I do? I talked to her. Gosh, what a novel concept. And I asked to speak to her ghost. Now, most doctors say, you don't do that. That's not real. What are you doing? Well, I have found that when you follow your patients, they take you where they need to go.
Right. I've known that too. Yeah.
Right. So if it's a bizarre story, that's fine. Just go along. So I asked to speak to the ghost. And at first she said the ghost can't come because she only comes at night. But I convinced her to have the ghost come. And I asked through the girl, is it true you want the girl to kill herself? And the ghost said, yes. I said, why?
Wow.
The ghost said, because she's had a horrible childhood and I wanted to relive it in a better way.
Okay.
I could sort of follow that ghost logic. I got that. And I said to the ghost, well, I'm teaching her how to cope with a horrible childhood by teaching her hypnosis techniques and calming techniques. And when she dies of old age, not if, but when, she can relive her childhood as she chooses to. And the ghost said, okay, that works for me. I would like to become her guardian angel.
Ah,
and
okay.
I said to her, would that be okay if your ghost became the guardian angel? And she said, yes, as long as I don't have to see her anymore because she spooks me. And I said to the ghost, is it okay if the girl doesn't see you anymore? And the ghost said, yes. I said to the ghost, say goodbye to the ghost. The ghost left, never seen again. She was there every night. And over the next 6 months, we got her off all the antipsychotics. And I discharged her on Prozac or antidepressant, and that was that. And she was fine. That story's in the book. Now I'm going to tell you as a special bonus what's not in the book.
Yes.
And when I tell you what's not in the book, you'll understand why. And then we'll talk about why I wrote the book.
Yes, yes.
So it's like, remember Paul Harvey? He used to say, now for the rest of the story.
Yeah.
So after this session with the ghost, I wanted to tell the girl's mother what had happened because she had tried to commit suicide twice. This was sort of usual therapy. I wasn't exactly sure what would happen. So with the girl's permission, we went downstairs and told the mother what had happened. And the mother said, what did the ghost look like? And the girl said, oh, she was like a 3-year-old girl in a white dress.
Huh.
And the mother said, oh, that's what I've been seeing around the house some mornings.
Wow. I love it.
So you can decide what you want to do with that information.
Well,
I would have said,
I have a counter story to that because back in 2016, I went to go see Dr. Terry Palmer in London. Okay. And he was on this show. He's now deceased, unfortunately. And I found him on YouTube. I had some questions for him because I was experiencing these things, and I was going to hypnotherapy myself. So he does a lot of spirit release. He wrote a book, his doctoral dissertation on spirit release. So, and he is a part of, or was a part of, the Society of Cyclical Research in London. London is awesome. Like, let me tell you, has a lot of very cool psych stuff. Okay. Florence Nightingale was also, would do seances and stuff. It's really cool. But anyway, so I encountered him in London. He gave me his book. I had him on the show. I researched it a lot. And I had friends who would be like, I see this in my home. So I started to go and do these spirit releases. And it was very, very interesting. But they would come back to me and say, it's gone. I feel so much better. My life is different. you know? So yes, I've studied hauntings quite a bit. And what I think of, I have different theories. I think of, if you believe in quantum physics, there could be timelines that are overlapping. There could be thought forms. I was listening on TikTok the other day, and a woman said that someone called her who bought her childhood home and said that they were hearing her voice in there. So even though the woman's alive, her thought form is still in her childhood home. Isn't that very interesting? So, and again, you go back to that thing in time, like what is actually going on? Is that woman still living in that home? Meanwhile, other people are living there. Is it a true haunting, or are there parallel realities going on? I mean, it's very, very fascinating to me because I've looked into it and I go, I think there's overlapping timelines that are happening. So it's this moment in time is correlating with this moment in time somehow, and it's very, very interesting. So it's not really a haunting per se. It's not really a ghost living there. It's actually, there's other people living there while you're living there, but in another time space and another consciousness. Could be. I mean, it's a theory I've really looked into quite a bit.
Right. Well, the point is we don't know it. I think or extra reality, if you would, is probably more complex than we can imagine.
Of course. Yeah.
But coming back to the book, and the reason I did not put and now the rest of the story in the book is my mission at this point in life is to spread the word about hypnosis to people who don't really know much about it. And I'm a student of the history of hypnosis. So back in the early 19th century, Anton Mesmer used hypnosis, although he called it mesmerism. So we got the word mesmerized from. And he actually treated a lot of people with what he thought was magnetism, especially women with fainting spells. And he would treat them and they'd be cured. The TikTok example of kids developing Tourette's is because they're hearing about other girls, mostly girls with Tourette's, and they develop the symptoms. So 200 years ago, people developed fainting, hysterical fainting, because it was quite common. And Anton Mesmer cured it. So in the middle of the 19th century, before the development of anesthesia, I think it was James Esdale, a surgeon, did 300 surgeries with hypnosis as the analgesia, because there was no anesthesia.
Mm-hmm.
The British Medical Society came to investigate, and they couldn't believe that people were sitting there without pain. They said, oh, they're just pretending it doesn't hurt. They couldn't believe it. And then in the mid-19th century, ether was developed, and so people stopped using hypnosis for anesthesia. Then in the later part of the 19th century, Dr. James Braid coined the term hypnosis, which means type of sleep. He realized quickly it wasn't sleep, so he wanted to rename it monoideism, single idea, but that name didn't stick. We get stuck with hypnosis. Then in the later part of the 19th century, people started saying all these amazing things about hypnosis. So not only for pain control and stuff like that, but that you can contact spirits and tell if you're healthy or sick. And the public didn't buy it.
Right.
Then hypnosis got a bad reputation and dropped out until Freud picked it up for a bit of time, then he dropped it. So I'm well aware of this history. And I'm a student of history, and I want to repeat it. So when I wrote the book, I have a lot of weird stories to share.
Yeah.
But I excluded them from the book because people have a hard enough time understanding hypnosis as using your imagination to heal yourself.
Right.
Than to say, well, it could be a portal to the other side.
And I really like that you did that because it reads like a textbook and it is needed. You know what I mean? It's like I had it at the coffee shop the other day, and there's a guy that I see there all the time, and he's getting I forget what kind of degree he's getting, but it has to do with health sciences. And he's all like, he goes, I don't understand you. You're a nurse practitioner, but you're always reading these type of esoteric books like other. And I go, it's because I've been in practice for 25 years and I love, I do Western and I do other stuff too. I do whatever works. I have a big tool bag that I pull from, but I experienced hypnosis myself because I was doing sprint triathlons back in 2008. And I've always been a swimmer my whole entire life. I used to swim competitively in high school, but I always had that fight or flight response, especially before a big race, because I love how you were working with teen athletes and they were having problems with their throats closing up. Okay. So I had something similar when I would do a race, like I would have fight or flight. I'd be like, and that whole thing. And it turns into freeze. So it's hard to get out of that. It's hard to shift your focus. So one day that actually happened to me when I was training, and the weirdest thing happened. I was in the middle of the ocean and I got stuck. I was in freeze mode. And what I couldn't understand was, I was like, I don't understand what's going on, because I know I can move forward, but my body's not going. And I don't know, I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense. I can swim, but I'm stuck. So that's when I really started to explore my subconscious mind. And I was walking in Los Feliz one day because I was working at Children's Hospital, and I found this sign that says, "Are you stuck?" Don't you love it how that happens? And it says, "Come in for sports hypnotherapy." And I was like, oh, hey. And I just went right in, booked an appointment. And I think I was seeing the therapist for 6 years on and off. Like I would go in whenever I felt I needed a tune-up, whenever I felt like, hey, this and this is happening in my world, let's explore. And we would go in and it's kind of like an onion. So, I would just uncover more and more stuff that was going on in my subconscious mind. And my world really changed. Not only my world, but my family's world changed, and my friends as well. And then I started to study it. And with storytelling, I started to really look at people's stories and helping them shift, out of their subconscious programming. Let's talk about the subconscious mind a little bit, because I remember in the book you said good angel, bad angel, and how you speak to that with kids and how you help empower them as well, which I love with the positive words, because these days there's so much negativity, music, I've seen kids listening to very, very dark music and turn dark. I've had patients come in going, I don't know what's wrong with my kid. They're always so, and it's a small kid, it's like 3 or 4 year old. They're misbehaving, they're having weird behaviors. And so the parents have like horror movie t-shirts on, and they're all tatted up. They're all, and I'm just like, okay, so one day I'm just talking to the little girl. We're having this really good conversation. I believe she was about 3 or 4. And so she was on the exam table, and then she looks down and she goes, Pennywise is down there. And I go, Pennywise? How do you know about Pennywise? And she goes, oh, and she started telling me the whole story of Pennywise. And I asked the mom, I go, how does she know about Pennywise? She goes, oh, we watch horror movies all the time.
People have so little common sense these days. I want to pick up on, you said when you were swimming, you were stuck. I think that's a nice metaphor. I think this is true for medical symptoms or for other life events. People move forward and get stuck, and hypnosis and the subconscious can help get unstuck. The other thing I want to mention is that, and I'm going to mention my book name in case somebody wants to know, Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis. So where we talk a lot about the subconscious is that the therapy does not have to be long. I mean, some people come in for tune-ups and stuff over many years, but the average patient who has a medical condition for whom the symptoms have been made worse by their psychology. So let's say you have asthma and you get anxious because you can't breathe. Then when you learn hypnosis, you can calm yourself and your asthma is much milder. Well, let's say you have irritable bowel syndrome and you have stomach aches all the time. You do hypnosis, and within 3 weeks, you're much, much better. And so the therapy can be quite brief, 3-4 sessions, and you're done.
Right.
For the basic stuff. And that's for like 2/3 of the medical patients I've encountered. It's 3 or 4 visits, not a long time. However, if you want to get the full benefit of hypnosis, including a lot of subconscious work, of course, that could be a lifetime of work.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
The subconscious. So I have learned from, again, my patients that the subconscious is a source of great wisdom, and knowledge. Sometimes the patient can access things outside of themselves. That's pretty clear to me. I have one Christian boy who sees Hebrew that he does not understand, but he can point to the letters on a Google letter chart of Hebrew letters. I know what it's saying because I'm a native Hebrew speaker, as an example. So where does that come from? Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious. Again, trying stuff on.
Huge Carl Jung follower.
Yeah. Again, it's about the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I rely on the subconscious as my co-therapist. So once I teach the young person how to interact with the subconscious, which typically will be a third visit, I will ask the subconscious, what do you think we need to work on? I'll ask the kid, I'll ask the subconscious. Sometimes they disagree. I ultimately let the kid choose, but they oftentimes go along with what their subconscious says. So, you mentioned earlier before we came on the air that you've dated men who act.
And
like
I was gonna share.
Okay,
We're so on. I love it. We're
well, let me answer the question before you ask.
Yes, I'm gonna share a story about that. Yes.
Right. But let me tell you my spin on it, then you can share your story.
Yeah.
If you even heard the story, or maybe I did hear it.
Maybe you did hear it in the future,
Yeah. But we can have what we maybe term ego state. Part of us can get stuck. And I can share a story after your story. I'll share a story about an ego state that got stuck. And the way to help those kids is to talk to that stuck young version of yourself and let it move forward, and then things resolve. So I'm going to think that in the story you're about to share, the gentleman who's stuck had an unresolved issue in teenage years.
Yes.
And the way to help him, if you're the right person to help him, is to help that version of him get unstuck. But
yes,
the story now.
it's not only one man, it's many. That's the thing. And that's why I either think they're attracted to me, or I think that I'm just the healer. I don't know, I've come to, I'm the advocate. I could tell you some other ghost stories for another time that I think you'll find very, very fascinating. But yeah, so they kind of have robotic speech, first of all, and that is the ego, correct? Where it's the subconscious programming. And so it just boots in. So they're not speaking from their conscious self, right? And so, and I find with texting, that's even worse. Like, I think texting for dating is terrible, because they're coming from another part of their brain, right? It's kind of like a robotic programming. It's not really the conscious, some of them, like when I first started to really pay attention to this, it was a guy and he was being very lewd. Like we had spent a beautiful day in Griffith Park, just laying on the grass and just enjoying each other's company. And it was very platonic and it was very nice. So after, he sends me a text like, I can't even believe we didn't have sex. And it was just like, and then just the things he was saying, it was like a 14-year-old kid, and I could pinpoint the age. I go, this is a 14-year-old kid. All of a sudden, what? Like, where did he come from? Out of nowhere. And I was like, boom. And I got this attack. And I was like, whoa, what was that? And I started to look into it, and then I started to see this more and more in these men that I date. But they're a specific type. I think a lot of them were addicted to porn, that I found, and because I started to explore this with them. One of my friends calls me Dr. Masters of Sex, because he goes, what are you doing? I go, it's very interesting. It's almost like I'm studying them and I'm onto something, which I am writing a conscious dating book to put all this information in there, because I don't think I see people share these stories on TikTok and I go, you don't know what's going on. There's a lot of very strange subconscious programs. And I don't know why. Do you think it's because of the social media, the porn, the phones, I don't remember dating being this difficult, before the whole internet era.
Well, I talked to you earlier. I must have come to the future and come back about how pornography is affecting the teenage
Yes. Oh, it's terrible.
boys in
Yeah.
particular, they don't know how to interact sexually with a human being. They
Right.
know how to get sexual satisfaction from watching a pornographic video, which doesn't even represent real sex, and they just don't know. They haven't had the experience. And so I think that's what you're getting. You're getting these man-childs who've
Yeah.
never progressed beyond being teenagers.
Right, right. And for some reason, and it is a pain, it is either an unrequited love that they had like at 15, because I just asked one, like again, he was kind of my test subject. I was like, let's go to dinner, I'll pay. And we went to a nice restaurant because I just wanted to hear his story, like what was going. I know he's very troubled. He's drinking a lot and there's just a lot there. So I just kind of wanted, I felt in my heart space, my higher self was like, you need to help him some way. And it was more of a storytelling, talking thing. The funny thing was, his higher self told me how to help him. It was almost like fancy dinners don't work for this man. And he told me, he goes, handwritten letters are really special. They do something to the subconscious. And I was like, that is bizarre. So I guess I have to send him a handwritten letter, or do you find, because this is interesting that happens to me, I'll be talking to someone and all of a sudden their voice shifts and changes and they tell me something, and then I go to it and then I'll come back to them and I'll ask them about it and they have no recollection they told me.
Yeah, what you
So that's
subconscious, that's your subconscious speaking. That's
Right.
subconscious speaking for sure. And one of the characteristics is that people often don't remember what happens in the subconscious level. I have a patient I work with who I'm very attuned to. I call it resonance. I think our brainwave align. I know our heart rate align.
Yeah.
So when we work together, invariably, however long we work together, we're done. It's done. It's over because we've been in trance. I've been in trance as well.
Yes.
Right? So I think you're
That
picking
happened
up.
to me. I go into trance sometimes with these guys, and I was like, why am I in trance with them? What is going on? It's either because I don't know what it is. Sometimes it's.
I think you're a healer, I suspect.
Yeah.
And there's
I am. I
have,
got my trance done by 10 people and they all say the same thing.
Since I moved to
Every
California
psychic.
8 years ago, I've been sent 24 maybe kids who are really special kids. They're very they're old souls. They want to help the world. They come
to me too. Yeah.
They're very bright. They're kind of anxious because they don't know what to do with all this stuff that's coming at them.
Yeah.
And I relate really well to all of them.
Me
and
too.
I think they're sent to me to sort of help them sort it out. Let me tell you a story. We talked about stuck subconscious. So at 29, I recently saw a 29-year-old in Syracuse. I do video counseling too. I still have my license in New York where I used to work. And when I met him, I said, well, this appointment was an error because I don't see adults. I work with kids. But my intake person thought you were 19. And he said, well, I don't have to keep the appointment. I said, yeah, I'll work with you. It must be meant to be. So what are you here for? Needle phobia. I said, I know, but needle phobia, I deal with a lot of kids with that. So we talked some more, and he's not really afraid of he's not afraid of pain, which is what most kids are worried about. He'd rather have dental work without any anesthesia than have the needle. He's afraid of needles. And he said this started when he was 3 years old. He doesn't remember that, but the story is he had a lot of stitches from an injury when he was 3. I said, oh, well, maybe you don't have a needle phobia per se, you have fear of medical procedures. Then we keep talking, and he says, I was referred to you when I was 10 years old. My pediatrician sent me to you, but my family was afraid of hypnosis. I said, oh, you are one of my patients. Okay, just 19 years later. Okay, I got you. So the next time we met, I taught him how to do hypnosis. And there's a technique in hypnosis called age regression, where you go back in time in your memory and you relive a traumatic event in a calm way. And that typically takes care of phobias and traumas. I mean, most simple traumas. So we did that. He went back, the subconscious went back to the time he had the stitches, and he taught himself to calm himself, and he calmed down in his imagination, and he checked another time later in his imagination, later in time, and he was still calm. So I said, come on back. And I said, okay, now you couldn't look up a needle on the internet before, so why don't you look it up, see what's changed? he starts typing. He says, I can't do it. I can't even type the word needle. I'm getting flushed and dizzy,
Wow.
having all the reactions. I said, well, that didn't work. That's strange. Maybe you're different because you're an adult, because if you're a kid, this would work. And then I wasn't quite sure what to do next. So I said, ask your 3-year-old self what the problem is. And then he says, the only thing I heard was mother. Actually, later he told me he heard mommy, but he changed it to mother because he's 29 years old. And I said, oh, your mom must not have been around when you had the stitches. Maybe she was in the back of the room. Maybe she was outside of the room. You were traumatized because you're separated from mom. I get that. So I took out a book called The Invisible String. Are you familiar with that book?
Which one is it called?
The Invisible String.
Huh. I'm not.
It's an illustrated book I use typically with 6 to 8-year-olds who have separation anxiety from their mom. And the premise of the book is that we're all connected with an invisible string of love.
I love that.
And if you tug on it, the person you love will feel it. And if they tug back, you'll feel their love. And the end of the book is none of us are ever alone.
Mm-hmm.
So I read him this storybook. I say, I'm reading this to your 3-year-old self. So I read him the storybook that typically read to 6 to 8-year-olds. And I finish and I say, so what'd you think of the story? So I liked it, but I got emotional in the middle.
Yeah, I'm getting emotional about you talking about it right now. So
I said, so look up the needle on the internet. I looked it up, could look at needles. I'm fine. He was cured. Because we got the 3-year-old unstuck. And the first guess, he was stuck because of the medical trauma. That wasn't it. He was stuck because he missed his mommy.
Right. And I do a similar thing. So I think I mentioned in our correspondence that I do shamanic journeying. Okay. And it does relate to my storytelling. And if anybody's taken my storytelling classes, it's very similar. It's kind of symbiotic, right? And it just depends on what people want, because I'll do the smoke and mirrors where I have a magic carpet that I got from Peru and it's very elaborate. Or I could do something very simple, which I did with my secretary a few weeks ago, where she was suffering this loss for many years of her cousin who had passed away. And she was very prominent at the school and they have a bench in her name, and she died of lupus when she was 21. Right. And so she kept coming to me and saying she was having paranormal activity in her home and all these things were happening. So she sat down and she told me the story of her cousin and how like people are starting to forget her at this school and that her daughter now attends. And so and she told me, she goes, oh, I used to work there, but I had to leave because they weren't paying me enough. And now I work here, as a secretary for a clinic. And so, but she was just so emotionally attached. So I go, well, what is bothering you about this, about your cousin? She goes, it's because I had to work that day when she died and I didn't get to say goodbye. So I took her back, and we did a journey and I took her back to the hospital. And she was able to say goodbye, and it was very emotional for her. So she just cried and cried and cried, and I brought her back. And she was like, I feel amazing. She felt like this weight had been lifted off of her, So it could be, if you believe, like my friend, Dr. Terry Palmer, that there was a spirit attachment on her. And I felt that she left her, it could have been a memory, it could have been a lot of things that she was anchoring in her subconscious, right? I've also seen this with, again, the men that I date, one in particular, and he was the one that I did this we did the carpet thing with the fire and stuff, which was super cool and fun. And I could see, because I kept seeing children around him, and these were all his child selves, and there were a lot of them. And I was just like, oh my God, So there was one in particular, I go, oh, okay, I invite you to tell me your story. I see a 4-year-old, that keeps wanting to come out and tell me a story. I invite that child to come and tell me the story. And he just started crying, and that child came out and told me how he had been bullied badly as a child. So I took him back there and I had him confront the bullies. And I used the David and Goliath scenario. I go, you are David, they are Goliath, who wins, and just beat up the bully. He could not do it. He was negotiating with the bully. So he had so many, he owned his own business, and he had so many problems in his own business, and people around him would bully him all the time. you know? So a year later, we had broken up, and a year later, he comes back to me, and it was a very Back to the Future scenario, which is a great movie. And I had watched this scene in Back to the Future where Marty McFly goes back and sees George McFly, his dad, before he's going to get beat up by Biff, and he's writing a book. And this guy had written a book too, which was hilarious. And he had issues, like there was some stuff going on with his son too. It was very, very interesting. So he calls me up one day, and I had just watched that clip, and I get a call from him, and he goes, "Do you remember the Back to the Future and the bullies?" And I go, "Yes." And I told him, I go, "It's interesting. I just watched that clip." And he goes, I go, "You couldn't beat up the bully." And he goes, "I couldn't." He still can't. And I go, and I told him, I go, "Just go back in your mind and do it." Said, "Would get back to me." "I can't." And I go, "I can't help you."
So
I,
first
you know,
I would throw at him what Henry Ford said 100 years ago. He said, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you are right." Whether you think you can or think you can't, you are right. And if he was in therapy with me, I would really work with his subconscious, find out if the subconscious feels good about himself or herself. The subconscious sometimes is opposite gender. And if the subconscious felt good about itself, then I would help the subconscious strengthen this guy up. If the subconscious is having trouble, I would want to explore why. Maybe there could be a past life story there or something.
There was a past life story where he was a centurion. Okay.
Right.
And so, but then I ended up finding out, he's a very interesting case, that he had multiple personalities. He had dissociative identity disorder. And he was creating these altars because he had been bullied, you know, and one of the altars had taken over. I mean, I'm writing a screenplay about it. It's all very interesting. I talked about it with him, and we had discussed what was going on for a long time, because I had seen 3 in particular that were controlling him. And one was this main character that was like the business guy. He was kind of like a madman from the show Mad Men. Then there was the true self, which I really had connected with, you know, immensely. It was incredible. And then there was the golem, which I think you can associate with, who was a Frankenstein. And I saw him turn into Frankenstein one night. I was like, he literally was doing the moves, wore different shoes. I was like, this is wild. You know, he could still speak to me, but like Frankenstein, you know? I just was like, so I would tell him, because I studied Carl Jung, and I came up with this idea. And I said, your main character, I won't say the name, you have to cut. And he started to really paint, and he had always been an artist, and he'd really get into his paintings and stuff. I go, you need to do a painting of yourself with a head on a silver platter, and that's yourself. You have to decapitate this character, you know. And Carl Jung says, so it's basically you, I forget the meaning of it. I have it all mapped out somewhere. It's the Medusa. So you are incorporating that soul back so he can get back into wholeness. And he was like, I love that idea. That's so cool. And I go, yeah, whenever you're ready. So, you know, and we connect every once in a while and stuff like that. But it is all very, very interesting. And it is part of my screenplay. But it goes back to, and one of my favorite paintings is the John the Baptist, if you know it, on the silver platter, with the head on the silver platter. And there's also the Salome, I think it's called, with the head on the silver platter. So I became obsessed with all these beheading paintings, which are very, very fascinating. If you start studying them, you start going down rabbit holes with all these things. And it's interesting where they lead you. But yeah, he was my first one that I really started to look at. And then I started to look at dissociations. But what I find is these men have psychic children who I am communicating with. And they're like, help my dad because he is a mess. And it's very, and I'm like, oh, I guess I'm the advocate. That's who I am. And so I get these messages and I relay them back, and it's right on. And they'll go back to their, and it does, like with my first case, with the multiple personalities, his relationship got much better with his son, much better. And once he became aware, and now I'm working with another one, which is a similar situation, but a little bit different, so, but it is very fascinating how that all comes together, but pretty wild.
Going back to your secretary, I would have, when I do a version of what you did, rather than going back to the past, I teach them how to do hypnosis. And then I suggest they invite their loved one to meet with them in the present and have an interaction. And I've found that that is healing in the majority of patients, and also that they believe it's real. And then they can use that. They can keep talking to loved ones the rest of their life if they so choose. So it's not something buried in the past. It becomes very present and future oriented. So I encourage you to check it out.
Yeah, I've done that with other friends, as well. It's just it's intuitive. It's like whatever needs to be done. Like with her, she kept saying she needed to go back there. So in her subconscious, she was kind of stuck. She felt bad that she was working and didn't make the time to go back there, and then there was a weird thing with that this cousin had gotten cremated, and then the ashes were kept outside. It was weird. So it was a very interesting story. I mean, these are all things I'm writing about because they're very fascinating. I've worked with several of my friends, and it's just because, and they'll come to me and they'll be like, okay, I need to, and then sometimes I do it with them. And so they'll give me information that I need for my life, I mean, I found a mechanic intuitively one day. I was like, oh, I need a German mechanic to work on my BMW. And there he was right across the street from my house working on a Mercedes, came and changed a battery for me, but then there were certain things, but then he was giving me tips. I'd like, hey, da, 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 and he'd be like, oh, you need that, da, da, da. I was like, oh, wow, he was great, so he was a great mentor that came into my life. One thing I want to talk about briefly is when kids are in abusive relationships with their parents. Okay. I'm going to go over this because I'm studying the vagal nerve. I had this patient one day. She was 2 years old. She came in and she had Bell's palsy, which is strange in a 2-year-old, right? And so I asked the little girl, ¿Qué pasó? She spoke Spanish, and she goes, Me pegó una niña. And I was like, oh, and I was like, and so she's telling me, and the mom cuts her off and says, well, this is what happened. She has Bell's palsy. We went to the ER, but 2 months ago, she never plays with other children. She was playing with this other child. She took away a toy. The other child slapped her in the face. And the child, the little girl, my patient, the 2-year-old, never forgot it. Okay. And she kept complaining about it. And she kept talking to her mom. She was traumatized, And so all of a sudden, she got Bell's palsy on that side where the little girl slapped her. And I was like, isn't this fascinating? I was talking to another nurse practitioner. She tells me the same story. She's like, well, I had a patient who was in the parents were always arguing. They were about to get a divorce. And then she kept seeing the patient over and over again. And all of a sudden the kid came in with Bell's palsy. She goes, I swear that kid's Bell's palsy was caused by stress from the parents. And I go, yes, studying the vagal nerve, that trauma gets stuck, and you do a lot with breathing as well. I mean, I have another friend who called me and was talking about her daughter. Her ex-husband was very abusive, how can I say, gaslighting, narcissistic. So she noticed these same traits in her teenage daughter. I believe she's 15 years old. Okay. And she said that she's always been a liar ever since she was a kid. And then is always gaslighting the mom. And I told her, I don't think I go, it seems like she's suffering from PTSD. And like I read in your book too, these lies, she's trying to protect herself, right? It's kind of like a protection mechanism.
Right. So you're asking me what to do in situations with the parents or the bigger issue in the kid, perhaps.
Right.
Is that the question? Well, that's really, really tough. Sometimes the parents are amenable to suggestions. So fortunately, more often than not, in a situation like this, the parent might be abusive, but they don't realize they're abusive, or that's the only way they know how to raise the kid. And when they're given guidance of how to communicate, let's say with a teenager in a healthier way, they jump at it. I talk to parents about 3 things when dealing with teenagers. One is to listen to them. Yes. Really listen. Don't cut them off. And if the teenager doesn't make sense, don't tell them it doesn't make sense. Work within their world. And I tell teenagers the same thing. Listen to your parents. Don't cut them off, and try to do your best to understand what the parent is working on. Then I tell the parents, second rule is respect your child. You say, why does the kid respect me? Well, you need to respect your child, especially again, a teenager. They have their own ideas. Sometimes they have to do things the wrong way to learn how to do things, and that's okay. I tell parents about how when a toddler learns to walk, they fall, they get up, they fall, they get up, they fall, they get up, and finally they get it. I say it's the same process in teenagers. It's just a different entity. They're going to mess up, get up, mess up, get up. Just be patient. Don't assume they're going to be horrible and all that stuff. And the third thing I tell them is don't argue about what happened in the past. I go into this thing about memory is imperfect, which it is. We don't really remember how things happen. We remember how our brain allows us to remember.
Right.
And so you can both see the same event and have different memories. Doesn't mean anybody's lying. So so many families, you said this, no, I didn't. Yes, you did. No, I didn't. And you spend hours talking about it. You lie, you lie. Let it go. So if you disagree, say we disagree or different memories, let's talk about how to do it in the future. So those 3 rules, the majority of parents and teens get it, and things improve a great deal. It's fun to see. It's really healing for the families. Then you run into parents who are really pathologic.
Yes.
Who are unable to see their pathology, be it the narcissistic parent who just thinks everything about him or herself, and just the kid is just a tool in their toolkit. I have one parent who tells me, well, I want to make sure my kid is somebody I could have married.
What? Yeah,
because I never found a right partner because they weren't raised right. So I'm going to make sure my kid is like that. And she hyper programs the kid who is just starting to rebel, appropriately so, and doesn't understand why he's not following her directions. And when I try to call on it, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, I can't help that kind of situation. I remember one child I saw who had headaches, chest pain, and stomach aches, and he'd been seen at 5 medical centers. I was a 6 medical center. No one could find anything medically wrong. The last medical center knew I did hypnosis, sent to me. So I tell the parents, well, I recognize those symptoms. I see them all the time. These are stress symptoms. Let me teach him hypnosis. Let's see how much better he gets. If he gets better, great. If he doesn't get better, we could do more tests or something.
Right.
The parents said, we're both college professors. We believe in the mind-body connection, but we're not going to let you teach our child hypnosis, and walked out. I wanted to call Child Protective, but they wouldn't do anything with it. It was just sad because clearly these parents have a big problem. You can hypothesize why. Maybe they have a bad marriage and the kid's symptoms focuses them on the kid as opposed to on themselves, or maybe this could be like a Munchausen's by proxy kind of situation. Yes. Where you need the kid to be sick, but I can't help that, and it's frustrating because the kids are suffering.
Yeah.
But if they have a malignant parent, that's where I say my job is to do the best I can and to offer possible solutions, but I can't help everyone. Do you have a better solution? Have you found what to do with such parents?
It's really difficult. and I follow your lead. I mean, sometimes I can do so much, but I find that I try, and some actually come back later, and then when they're ready. I had a patient who didn't like me, and I saw her child when he was 1, and I said, I think something's going on. He doesn't have eye contact. He's autistic, and she was like, well, I want to talk to the doctor. I don't want to talk to you. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. I go, well, you're free to come see one of the doctors. I mean, it's up to you. Well, guess who she comes and sees all the time now? Because we talk about, and now we have a great relationship. I mean, she really can confide in me, and she tells me certain things because she knows. And every time I see my patient, like I saw him today, now he has eye contact, and he's so much better than when I first saw him, and I see him in little spurts, and little by little he is coming back. It's almost like he had a soul loss somehow. And we were talking about birth trauma today, and she feels that it happened there, and so his soul is stuck somewhere. So we're slowly bringing, and I could see he's coming back slowly and slowly, and her partner was very reluctant to have him tested for autism. And I sent her to the regional center probably 3 or 4 times already, and she's refusing to call. And today we really talked about it. I go, listen, because she's afraid of the diagnosis. I go, he may not have autism, but at least we know, and we could get him the proper treatment and occupational therapy or whatever he needs. He's in speech therapy now that I sent him. And he can slowly start working on that. I go, they will give him the proper tools. So we're not looking at a life sentence, but we're looking at help for him so that he can function in the world, So on the phone, her partner was like, yes, okay, now we're going to go so it's amazing to see this progression, although it's very slow, but I understand it. So I just follow where they're at. And so that's what I've seen. So this is like one of the patients that has come back. There's been other ones who then are like, remember when now I'm ready, and everybody has their time. So, and maybe some people aren't meant to be, I was told by many spiritual practitioners, not everybody's meant to be healed in this life.
Right.
Right. We do our best. All right. So where can people find you, Dr. Anbar?
So you can look to dranbar.com, DRAN as in Nancy, B as in boy, AR.com. There's a lot of information about hypnosis there. I'm in La Jolla, California. So if you have a child who could benefit from hypnosis, look me up. I will tell you that I believe any child with chronic symptoms could benefit from hypnosis. Either their psychology is involved because they have chronic symptoms, because let's say if they have breathing problems, they might get anxious. Or if they have stomach aches, they might get depressed. Or their psychological problem causes their symptoms. And then if you deal with the psychology, symptoms just go away. And Western medicine does a very poor job in identifying the psychological underpinnings of physical symptoms. So, and this is why alternative medicines help. But I tell you, hypnosis in my mind is the most efficient way of addressing the psychology of a child or a person. It doesn't take very long, 2-3 sessions. And as I told you before, 2/3 of my medical patients improve dramatically just with that, just learning how to relax.
Yes, I especially like the work that you were doing with kids who have seizures and kids who had the chronic asthma, and learning how to regulate their brain. That one child where he had a broken brain, where he was getting fevers all the time. He had a lot of brain damage, but you told him turn on the air conditioner, right?
Yep. And then he had no fevers. So that's chapter 8 of my book, Changing Children's Lives with Hypnosis.
Yes.
Order on Amazon or Barnes & Noble.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link on the show notes. But thank you so much, Dr. Anbar. This has been super fun. I want to have you on again. Maybe we'll meet.
Maybe we've already done it already. But
True, in the future. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you so much.